All right, we back on the way in. I told you we had to take a pause for the cause, but I got a couple more fights I want to ask the world-renowned judge Tim Cheatham about. You know what I mean? The first fight I want to jump into, bruh, is a fight you was a part of. The Tyson Fury Deontay Wilder 3.
Mm.
You know, I'm not gonna ask you what you had it scored because your score doesn't even matter. Tyson Fury did his job. You know what I'm saying? But how did you feel like the fight was going before Tyson Fury took the job out of your hands? You know what I'm saying? If I could say it that way, you know?
That's one way to put it.
Right,
But
right, right.
the thing that I've described that fight in the past, which is much like the first two, it's sheer violence. Those two gentlemen, very heavy-handed. Every punch meant something. Every boxing match, every fight is a little bit different. Every fighter is a little bit different.
Mhm.
You've got your boxers, you've got your punchers. These two gentlemen it was pure violence. Every punch that landed meant something. So it kind of goes back to that general rule I was saying as far as what we look for, the effect of the punch. Every punch affected the other boxers.
Mm.
So not only was it a pleasure to watch, it was just something that, you don't get to see so much because you have these two, very large gentlemen in the ring that are very good at what they do and the best at what they do. And these two gentlemen hitting each other with the force in which they were hitting each other, it
Mm.
was just amazing that it lasted the 11 rounds that it lasted.
I paid my good money. That was a great fight. You know,
Right.
I mean, like the first fight. Like I want to go back a little bit. Like the first fight. Um, I honestly thought a draw was the right call. I mean, I really do. I'm not a judge. I ain't been through the rigmarole that you've been through,
Sure.
but I honestly feel like as a fan of the sport, being from Vegas, and I'm from the culture, being from Vegas, I honestly feel like that fight was a draw on the first one because clearly, all Deontay was looking for was the right hand. And then Tyson Fury was kind of boxing him. And the fact that the fight was still a draw after he dropped him twice, in my eyes, it made me look like Tyson Fury was winning that fight. But then two knockdowns Deontay Wilder had got made it a draw. But the homie wasn't judging that fight. He gave you his take on the fight that he was at. It was deadly blows on each fighter, and he's happy he didn't have to do his job because
This is true.
Tyson Fury did it for him. But I want to ask you about some fights you had nothing to do with because, like you said, you a fan of the sport. And before you got your license to judge, you was a fan of the sport. So I want to talk about a real big fight that happened in the city of Las Vegas that you had nothing to do with. So we can kind of chime in on that. And that's the Diego Corrales Luis Castillo fight. That fight right
Yes.
there, bro, as a fan of the sport, was one for the ages. Because the fight, to me, I'm gonna get your chime in because this is what you do for a living. I'm just a fan. But to me, like that fight was going one way all night. And then one fighter said, fuck it, bro. I'm tired of this. You know what I'm saying? And then
Right.
turned the tables real
Right.
quick and made the ref jump in and cut the fight to a halt. So give me your take on that fight, man. Not knowing you
Sure.
had nothing to do with it. I'm glad you didn't have to judge
Sure.
that fight, but just tell me how you feel about that
Sure.
fight.
I was at that particular time. I was knee deep in the amateurs, so I was a aspiring, boxing judge, boxing referee at the time, and so I came to a lot of the pro fights. And I'll give you an interesting take on that. That was one of those fights that it happened at the Mandalay Bay.
Yeah.
A lot of seats in the Mandalay Bay. I don't want to give you a true number of 17,000, 19,000, whatever that may be, but there was only 5, 6,000 people at that fight that night.
Mm,
Because it was a good fight on paper, but it wasn't a big selling fight.
right.
It was Cinco de Mayo weekend, I want to say. But that being said, we bought tickets, and I was with a group of guys, and we bought tickets, and we were actually able to move down. And from the first round on, I understood what this fight was about to be. I've been a part of, some similar fights where you understand it's going to be some give and take all night. That particular fight, I think you touched on it. I would venture to say it was probably the best fight I've ever seen. One of the top fights I've ever been a part of,
Man.
because I happened to be there at that time.
Right.
Going back to what we spoke about earlier, sheer violence. Obviously, these guys are a little bit smaller, so they can take a little bit more.
Yeah.
But that being said, these guys highly skilled fighters, both champions, and the amount of punishment that both of them took. I mean, that goes back to what I stated earlier. I mean, these gentlemen can train and put their bodies through what they put it through, and make their lives be a part of what they're about to do as far as in that boxing ring, I can at least be that person that wants to give as much effort as an official. So I say that to you because asking my opinion of that fight, it was one of the best fights, skill wise, endurance wise, storyline. When you add a storyline, like you said, it was going one way. You saw
Right.
what was happening.
Right.
The fight was almost over, and then all of a
Almost over,
sudden it
all
went
of a
completely the
sudden.
different the
Right.
other way. I mean, the sheer drama behind that. If you don't like that, that's sports at its ultimate high.
Highest.
At the highest
sure.
level. So going back to that, that's probably one of my top fights I've ever been associated with, whether I was a fan, whether I was working, whatever that was.
But let me ask you this, though, if you allow me to ask you this on the way in. Make sure you like and subscribe. You didn't judge that fight, but you were paying your dues up through the ranks. If you had to judge that fight, how did you have it?
Going back, not doing a round by round. I think over the years I've watched that fight numerous times.
Right.
Diego Corrales, who I'd actually met over the years.
I met him a couple times
he
too.
He was losing that fight, I think, slightly. I can't remember the exact scores, but at the end of the fight, that's what you go to. That's what the layman looks at. The layman looks at that particular fight, and they say, okay, here's what was happening in the 9th and 10th round, and then all of a sudden it switched. But he was losing. Something came out where the mouthpiece came out. I mean, all these different things to add to the drama, to give you what you received in that fight. And that's why it was also named, fight of the decade, fight of the century on a lot of publications, and rightfully so. I mean, just the amount of things that happened in that fight to get it to that level, to be a sports fan, whether you're a boxing fan or not, just to be a sports fan in general, to watch that, you couldn't help but be impressed.
Hey, I was impressed, man. I've literally have watched the ending of that fight at least 50 times. Only because I'm a boxing fan. So you can go to YouTube and you can find it. You'd be like, man, Diego is getting his ass whooped.
Right.
But then he got tired of that shit. Right. Okay, but now I want to jump into one more fight, man. And it's the weigh in. And I want you to weigh all the way in on this fight. You ain't had nothing to do with it. You was probably a young whippersnapper then. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? But talk to me a little bit about Hagler Hearns, because that fight right there was probably one of the most exciting fights, because I was a kid, right? But I didn't get much appreciation for it until I got older.
Sure.
Right? So that fight right there, all I remember is Jerry curl juice flying everywhere.
Sure.
Tommy Hearns was curl. He looked like he was fresh out the barbershop, perm rollers in. And Marvin Hagler didn't give a damn about none of that. You know what I'm saying? And that was probably the best, most exciting 4 rounds of boxing since the invention of the sport boxing.
Sure.
So chime in about that Hagler Hearns fight, because I know off camera you told me that was one of your favorite fights of all time. So how did you have that fight scored before the 3rd round?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because for me, I was 14 years old, and as we both know, at that age, you're impressionable.
Right.
And for me, I was the biggest boxing fan there was. And then to be able to be, to sit there and watch that fight on a closed caption where you have to go somewhere and actually watch it, for me, that was probably the most exciting thing that's happened in my 14 years at that time. I was 14 years old watching that fight. Huge Marvin Hagler fan because of, fights of that nature. But when, he went about it like that, knowing who Tommy Hearns was and understanding the sport a little bit, understanding that Tommy Hearns was a killer back then. And then for him to go up against Marvin Hagler, you knew what you were going to get into. Fast forward a bunch of years, during some of our training seminars, to kind of bring this back full circle, during some of our training seminars, those first 2 rounds, especially round 1, we use in training seminars. The reasoning why is because you have so much happening. You have so much going on. And like I said earlier, the number 1 criteria as far as a boxing judge is most effective punch. If you watched every punch in that first round of that particular fight, every punch was effective.
Yeah.
So from a judging standpoint, every single minute of that round, every single 10 seconds, 5 seconds of that round, it was going back and forth.
But how do you judge that, though, when it's something like that? Like, what separates?
So there you go. You have to be able to separate that in your mind. How you're sitting there like, what is the most effective punch? When Tommy Hearns lands that left and then that right, and Marvin Hagler walks through it and he lands that left hook, I mean, now you're just calculating.
They canceled each other out at that point.
You're canceling each other out, and you're going on your mental meter, constantly going back and forth in a particular fight like that. And those fights, honestly, from a boxing judge's perspective, at least for me, those are the funnest and most rewarding fights because, when you're watching two fighters go back and forth and they're giving it their all and you're just seeing the ebb and flow go back and forth and you don't know who's winning. And 1 minute, 1 second it's even, and the next second it's over here. And then after this, I can bring up a fight right now that, I won't get into, but Brandon Figueroa fights Stephen Fulton. Cool Boy Steph and Brandon Figueroa, Loverboy Figueroa. Whatever that is, wherever that camera is, those two young men went at it. And I'm talking about they gave it 150%. That fight was one of the more exciting fights that I've ever worked. It was a privilege. It was a true honor to be able to be a part of it on my little scale that I was. I hope my ability was able to pick the right winner, but those two gentlemen did a service for the sport. Just like the Marvin Hagler, Thomas Hearns fights, there's certain fights that do service for the sport. They get the layman involved. They make it to the point where the people that aren't into boxing now become fans because of what transpires in that ring, and that's what makes that sport so great.
Look here, man. We've talked about so much. I'm gonna ask you about one more fight. I didn't tell you I was gonna ask you about this fight, but you ain't had nothing to do with this fight, so you can weigh in on this because I was excited about these fights because I was a boxing fan. Talk to me a little bit about the Ward Gotti fights, because them were some wars. If you ever seen blood flying and leather and just angry Italians out there just getting it in. But them was like they went at it. Like, so them type of fights where both guys are coming for blood and it looks even on both sides, like weigh in on them type of situations. Because if you like Hagler Hearns, I know you loved Gotti and Ward.
Loved it. And I've actually had the privilege to talk to someone that was involved in that fight on a small scale and felt the exact same way that you just said. And to answer your question, it's just like Hagler Hearns from the excitement standpoint. Again, it tests your skills. You never want to go into something knowing that you're not working hard. Those are testing your skills because for 3 minutes, 180 seconds, you are completely locked in and zoned in on two, incredible fighters that, are trying to do the same thing, and you're in charge of essentially choosing who won that 3-minute fight.
Right.
And you have to do that 12 times. And for that sheer violence and the heart and the determination that those two fighters show, you have to be on point, the whole time. And so not only is it exciting, it's very, stressful as far as what you have to do, and you want to make sure you're doing it what's right for the fighters, but also what's right for the sport.
Right.
And I've always said, my pops back home, he always talks about, man, Tim, you've got the best seat in the house every night.
Yeah, you do.
And he's exactly right. And I'm not afraid to admit that.
Yeah.
I'm sitting in front of people that are spending thousands of dollars to sit in these seats.
Yeah.
But the thing I'll add to that is, along with having the best seat in the house, it's also the most stressful seat.
Oh yeah, you got the most pressure in you. I honestly believe, I hate to cut you off, but I honestly believe you have more pressure on you than the actual fighter, because the fighter is going to put in his 150 million fucking percent. And once he puts in his 150 million percent and it still goes to 12 rounds, his 150 million percent means nothing. It's all based on what you saw.
Correct.
So that's the hardest seat in the house. Trainer, fighter, manager, promoter. Whoop, the judge is the hardest seat to sit in the arena.
Right. And I would admit to that simply because of the sheer, what we have to go off of is what's happening in the ring, and what becomes of that is what I put down on that piece of paper. I've always told people, when you go take a test, I'm holding the answer cards in my hand. Those scorecards are the answer cards.
Right.
The test is in the ring. So I'm watching right here, and I got to put that answer down. I'm hoping to get 100% every single night. I'm aiming for 100%. Because you, the fan, the trainer, the fighter, it's not fair to the sport of boxing if I'm not doing right. If I'm not getting the correct answer. So to me, it's all about making sure that I do it right. So that goes back to, like I said, the preparation, the routine that I stick to, making sure that I'm 100% in and have my concentration and my focus level on to be able to do that. So when you come across a Ward Gotti fight, because you never know what you're going to get, that you're ready, that you're prepared, and that you're going to do a good job.
Man, well, look here, y'all. This has been a great hour and some change. Like, I don't want to say, I do want to say, like, I appreciate you, bro,
Appreciate you too.
because not a lot of people get to sit down with a man of your stature. You know what I mean? Like, you can even go back to before you was even thought of. Nobody sat down with none of the judges that scored a Muhammad Ali fight.
Right.
Nobody sat down with none of the judges that scored a early Floyd Mayweather fight or early Evander Holyfield fight. So like I really feel honored that you sat down with me to be the first judge, to me, the first judge in the history of the sport of boxing to sit down and give his take on the sport. So to that alone, bro, I appreciate you. I appreciate the relationship we have. Like it means a lot. And the way in, y'all better appreciate what my man dropped y'all because he gave you gems on gems on gems. You think they just showing up watching a fight for free? Nah, they got the hardest job in the arena outside of the fighters. So on behalf of the weigh in,
Appreciate you, T.
Mr. Tim Cheatham, I want to say thank you, bro, for letting us come to your crib. You see the memorabilia. This ain't no game. We got more over here, but we ain't going to show y'all that. So I just want to say, y'all, thank y'all for tuning in. And Tim, thank you so much, bro. Like, I just, you don't know how much I appreciate you, dog, because you the man. And just, it's hard to get a man of your stature to sit down and weigh in on this, you know? So on that alone, bro, I appreciate you. And I hope y'all enjoyed the interview. And we'll see y'all next time on the weigh-in.
Ding, ding. Woo-hoo, baby.